In the year 2387, the Galactic Council had cataloged over 14 million species across the known universe. They had encountered warriors who could shatter moons with their bare hands, beings of pure energy that manipulated time itself, and ancient races whose technology seemed like magic to younger civilizations. They had faced the Vrek swarm that devoured entire star systems and the crystalline architects who built worlds from cosmic dust, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for humanity. When the first human ship appeared at the edge of Council space, it looked primitive. Crude metal construction, chemical propulsion systems, and energy signatures so weak they barely registered on scanners. The Council's xenobiologists dismissed them as another pre-warp species that had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel through sheer luck. They were wrong, dead wrong, because while the galaxy had spent millennia perfecting technology and evolving beyond their physical limitations, humanity had taken a different path. They had kept their madness, their unpredictability, their absolute refusal to accept that something couldn't be done. They had turned their greatest weakness, their fragile, short-lived bodies, into their greatest strength. And when the shooting started, the stars themselves would learn to fear the sound of human laughter echoing through the void. Admiral Terra of the Galactic Council Fleet had seen many things in her 3 centuries of service. She had witnessed the birth of stars and the death of civilizations. She had negotiated peace between species so alien that they couldn't even perceive each other without technological assistance. But as she stared at the primitive vessel that had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Kepler, or 4-2 system, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: genuine confusion. The ship was impossibly crude by galactic standards. Its hull appeared to be constructed from basic metallic alloys, scarred and pitted from what looked like micrometeorite impacts and atmospheric entries. Energy readings suggested they were using fusion reactors, technology so outdated that most species had abandoned it before achieving spaceflight. The vessel's dimensions were modest, perhaps 300 meters in length, dwarfed by the kilometer-long dreadnoughts of the Council fleet. "Scanning complete, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Kethmos, his mandibles clicking nervously as he reviewed the data. "The vessel shows signs of organic inhabitants, carbon-based life forms, extremely primitive neural patterns. They appear to be using chemical propulsion for maneuvering thrusters." Admiral Terra's crest feathers ruffled with amusement. Chemical propulsion. She hadn't seen that since her academy days studying ancient civilizations. Most species developed gravitic manipulation within decades of achieving fusion power. These beings were clearly technological infants who had somehow stumbled onto faster-than-light travel, probably through some fluke of their primitive understanding of physics. "Hail them," she ordered, settling back into her command throne. "Standard first contact protocols. Let's see what these little ones want." The view screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of what could only be described as a flying scrap heap. Exposed conduits ran along bulkheads, jury-rigged systems sparked occasionally, and the whole place looked like it might fall apart if someone sneezed too hard. In the center of this mechanical chaos sat a creature that made Admiral Terra's secondary heart skip a beat. The being was bipedal, roughly 2 meters tall, covered in what appeared to be synthetic fabric rather than natural skin or carapace. Its face was asymmetrical in that peculiar way of young species, with 2 forward-facing eyes that spoke of a predatory evolutionary background. But what struck the Admiral most was the creature's expression. It was smiling, showing rows of bone-white teeth in what was clearly a threat display among its kind. "Well, hello there," the creature said, its voice carrying through the translation matrix with an odd casual quality that set everyone on the bridge on edge. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the human exploration vessel Defiance, and you folks have some explaining to do." The Admiral's translator struggled with the concepts. Human, exploration, defiance. The last word particularly seemed to break several linguistic subroutines before settling on what roughly translated to aggressive rejection of authority. I am Admiral Zixthar of the Galactic Council Fleet, she replied, following standard protocols. Your vessel has entered Council space without authorization. Please state your intentions and origin world for processing. The human's smile widened, and Admiral Zixthera felt an involuntary shudder run down her spine. Something about that expression triggered deep prey instincts that her species' evolution into sapiens hadn't quite managed to suppress. Council space? Captain Chen leaned back in her jury-rigged command chair. That's interesting, because according to our charts, this is empty space. We've been monitoring this region for radio signals, gravitational anomalies, anything that might indicate intelligent life. Been pretty quiet out here for the past 50 years. Lieutenant Kethmos whispered urgently to the Admiral. Ma'am, that's impossible. We've had monitoring stations throughout this sector for over 800 cycles. There's no way a species could observe this region without detecting our presence. Admiral Zixthera frowned, her crest feathers flattening against her skull. Captain Chen, our records indicate continuous council presence in this sector for 8 centuries. How could you have failed to detect our installations?
Maybe because you folks have been hiding. Captain Chen's tone remained conversational, but there was something underneath it that made the Admiral's skin crawl. See, that's the funny thing about humans.
We're curious by nature. When something doesn't want to be found, we get real interested in finding it. And when we went looking for you, she paused, tapping something on her primitive control panel. Well, let's just say we found more than we bargained for. The main screen split, showing tactical displays that made Admiral Zixthera's blood freeze. Detailed schematics of council monitoring stations, patrol routes, ship classifications, even the locations of hidden asteroid bases that were supposed to be classified beyond the reach of any non-council species.
How did you?
The Admiral began, but Captain Chen cut her off with a gesture. Stealth technology is a funny thing, the human said. Your people developed really good ways to hide from sensors, from energy detection, from pretty much every form of technological surveillance known to your science. Real impressive stuff. Must have taken centuries to perfect. The Admiral nodded slowly, unsure where this was leading. The thing is, Captain Chen continued, that predatory smile never leaving her face, you never learned to hide from Mark 1 eyeball. I don't understand. Looking out the window, seeing things with your actual eyes. The human gestured around her primitive bridge. All your fancy stealth tech works great against sensors, but it doesn't do squat when someone parks a ship in empty space and just watches. We've been watching you for 3 years now. Learning your patterns, your technologies, your capabilities, Admiral Zixthera felt her world tilting. The idea that a pre-warp species could conduct surveillance of council operations was absurd. It violated everything the galaxy knew about technological progression and strategic capability. That's impossible, she said firmly. Your technology is clearly inferior. Your vessel shows signs of crude construction methods and primitive power systems. Oh, this old thing? Captain Chen patted her armrest fondly. Yeah, the Defiance isn't much to look at. Built her in the asteroid belt out of mining equipment and spare parts. She's ugly as sin and breaks down every other day, but she gets the job done. Want to know why? Before the Admiral could respond, Captain Chen's expression hardened. The casual friendliness vanished, replaced by something that made every survival instinct the Admiral possessed start screaming. Because humans don't build things to be pretty. We build them to work, and when they break, we fix them. And when they can't be fixed, we build them again. And when someone tells us something can't be done, the human leaned forward in her chair. Well, that's when things get interesting. Lieutenant Kethmos's mandibles clicked frantically as new data streamed across his console. Admiral, I'm detecting massive gravitic distortions throughout the system. Multiple contacts appearing on sensors. The tactical display exploded with new contacts, dozens of them, then hundreds. Ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, taking positions that effectively surrounded the Council fleet. But these weren't the primitive vessels the Admiral had expected. These ships were different, larger, more angular, their hull configurations unlike anything in the Council databases. Allow me to introduce the rest of the neighborhood, Captain Chen said conversationally. Humanity's been busy while you folks were playing hide and seek. Turns out, when you spend 3 years watching the most advanced military force in known space, you learn some interesting things about warfare. Admiral Zixthera stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The human fleet outnumbered her forces 3-1, but that wasn't what frightened her. What frightened her was the formation they had taken, a perfect envelopment that demonstrated tactical knowledge that should have taken centuries to develop. "How many ships do you have?" she whispered. Captain Chen's smile returned, but now it looked like the expression of a predator who had cornered particularly tasty prey. "Well, now, that depends on how you define ship. See, humans have this philosophy about warfare. We call it overkill, the idea being that if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right." New contacts began appearing on the outer system sensors, larger signals moving with the ponderous inevitability of capital ships. The Admiral's tactical officer reported readings that made no sense. Vessels massing in the millions of tons, energy signatures that dwarfed anything in the Council fleet. "Admiral," Lieutenant Kethmos reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Long-range sensors are detecting additional contacts. Estimate over 2,000 vessels of various classes approaching from hyperspace vectors." 2,000? Admiral Zixthera's voice cracked. That's larger than the entire Council fleet." "Yeah, about that," Captain Chen said, studying something on her primitive display. "Turns out humans are pretty good at manufacturing when we put our minds to it." "And once we figured out your technology," she shrugged, "well, let's just say we've been having a productive few years." The Admiral's mind reeled. A species advancing from pre-warp technology to fielding a fleet larger than the Council's entire military in 3 years? It was impossible. It violated every known law of technological and industrial development. "What do you want?" she finally managed. Captain Chen's expression became thoughtful. "You know, that's a really good question. 3 years ago, we just wanted to explore, meet our neighbors. Maybe trade some cultural knowledge, share some scientific discoveries. Real friendly first contact stuff. And now?" The human smile turned cold. "Now we know what happens to species that don't meet your standards. We've been watching, remember? We've seen what you do to civilizations you consider primitive. The relocations, the technology confiscation, the cultural preservation programs." Admiral Zixthera felt her crest feathers standing on end. The human was referring to standard Council protocols for integrating pre-warp civilizations, proven methods for preventing cultural contamination and technological disasters. "Those are protective measures," she protested. "Young species need guidance to prevent them from destroying themselves with advanced technology." "Is that what you call it?" Captain Chen's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "From where we sit, it looks a lot like conquest. Take away a species' technology, relocate them to appropriate worlds, monitor their communications, control their development." She paused. "Some might call that slavery. You don't understand the dangers." "Oh, we understand perfectly." The human's eyes glittered with something that made the Admiral's skin crawl. "Building an empire and calling it a council, subjugating species and calling it protection." Captain Chen leaned back in her chair, that predatory smile returning. "The thing is, Admiral, humans have some experience with empires, and we've gotten pretty good at tearing them down." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of failing life support systems and the occasional spark from overloaded circuits. Admiral Zixthera stared at the primitive vessel on her screen and realized with growing dread that she was looking at something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that had turned their primitiveness into a weapon. "What happens now?" the Admiral asked. Captain Chen's smile widened. Now we have a conversation about the future of this galaxy, about what happens to empires built on lies." She paused, her expression becoming thoughtful. "But first, I think you should meet the rest of the fleet. Fair warning, though, some of my colleagues aren't as diplomatic as I am." The communication channel closed, leaving Admiral Zixthera staring at her tactical display as more and more human vessels appeared on sensors. Each one represented an impossible achievement, a species that had somehow compressed centuries of technological development into 3 years. And as she watched the primitive vessels take positions around her fleet with the precision of master tacticians, Admiral Zixthara realized that the galaxy was about to change forever. The stars, indeed, had not been ready. Admiral Zixthara had requested an emergency session with the Galactic Council High Command within minutes of her encounter with the humans, but the response had taken 6 hours to arrive. 6 hours during which her fleet remained surrounded by an impossible armada of primitive vessels that somehow outgunned the most advanced military force in known space. The holographic display in her ready room flickered to life, revealing the angular forms of the 5 High Counselors. Each represented a different evolutionary path. The crystalline architects who built worlds from pure thought, the energy beings of the Nexus Collective who had transcended physical form, the ancient keepers whose technology bordered on the mystical, the hive-minded synthesis who spoke with a billion voices, and the machine intelligences of the digital ascendancy who had uploaded their consciousness eons ago. "Admiral," spoke Counselor Prime Vex High of the Keepers, her voice carrying the weight of 50,000 years of accumulated knowledge, "your report is difficult to accept. A pre-warp species fielding a fleet of this magnitude is theoretically impossible. With respect, Counselor, I am transmitting real-time tactical data," Admiral Zixthara replied, her crest feathers flattened against her skull in stress. "The humans have over 2,000 vessels in this system alone, with more arriving hourly." The crystalline architect chimed with harmonics that translated roughly to skepticism. "The energy requirements alone would necessitate harvesting multiple star systems. Our monitoring stations show no evidence of such industrial activity." "That's because they're not using our methods," the Admiral said grimly. "They've developed parallel technologies that our sensors weren't designed to detect. The machine intelligence of the digital ascendancy processed for 0.3 seconds before speaking. Probability analysis indicates a 0.0001% chance of spontaneous technological advancement at this rate. Alternative explanation: external intervention or acquisition of advanced technology." "From whom?" Admiral Zixthara asked. "We've monitored every known spacefaring species. There's no one who could have provided this level of technological assistance without our knowledge." The energy being of the Nexus Collective pulsed with confused patterns. Perhaps they discovered a cache of predecessor technology. "The ancients left many artifacts throughout this spiral arm." "Negative," the Admiral replied. "I've studied their vessel construction. It's not based on any known predecessor design philosophy. It's uniquely theirs. Crude, but effective. Like they took our technology and rebuilt it according to completely different principles." Counselor Prime Vex High leaned forward in her throne. "Explain." Admiral Zixthara called up the technical scans on her display. "Look at their power systems. Instead of elegant matter-antimatter reactors, they use brute force fusion with magnetic confinement that should be impossible to maintain. Their hulls are composite metals with embedded redundancy systems. If one section fails, 3 others take over its function. Their weapons," she paused, studying the data again. "Their weapons are kinetic accelerators firing depleted uranium projectiles at significant fractions of light speed." "Primitive," the synthesist collective buzzed in unison. "Devastatingly effective," the Admiral corrected. "They've turned simplicity into a strategic advantage. Our shields are designed to deflect energy weapons and exotic particles." Against solid projectiles traveling at these velocities, she shook her head. "Penetration is nearly guaranteed." The architects chimed with sudden interest. "You're suggesting they've developed entirely parallel technological evolution?" "I'm suggesting they've weaponized their limitations," Admiral Zixthara said. "Every primitive aspect of their technology has been turned into a tactical advantage. Their ships look crude because they're designed to be repaired in combat using basic tools. Their weapons are simple because simplicity means reliability. Their tactics are unpredictable because they don't follow any established strategic doctrine. Counselor Prime Vexahai was silent for several moments, processing this information. Admiral, you mentioned they had been observing our operations for 3 years. How is this possible? Visual observation, the Admiral said, the words bitter in her translator. They parked ships in empty space and watched us with optical instruments. All our stealth technology is designed to fool sensors, not eyes. The silence that followed was profound. The idea that the galaxy's most sophisticated military had been observed by beings looking out windows was so fundamentally absurd that none of the counselors seemed capable of formulating a response. Finally, the digital ascendancy spoke. This represents a critical intelligence failure across multiple systems. Recommendation: immediate military response to eliminate the threat. With what? Admiral Zixthara asked bluntly. They outnumber my fleet 3-1, with technological advantages we don't understand and tactics we can't predict. Even if we could defeat them here, intelligence suggests this is only a fraction of their total capability. How large a fraction? Counselor Prime Vexai asked quietly. The Admiral consulted her tactical displays. Unknown, but Captain Chen referred to this as the neighborhood. Implications suggest this is a local response force, not their main fleet. The energy being pulsed with alarm. Are you suggesting they have additional forces? I'm suggesting, Admiral Zixthara said grimly, that we may be looking at the tip of an iceberg. They've had 3 years to prepare, and if their industrial capacity is anything like their tactical innovation, she didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Open communication channels, Counselor Prime Vexhai ordered. We will speak with these humans directly. The holographic display shifted, showing the primitive bridge of the human vessel. Captain Chen was still in her jury-rigged command chair, but now she was accompanied by other humans. Admiral Zixthara noted with professional interest that each wore different uniforms, suggesting multiple command structures or perhaps rival factions. Counselors, Captain Chen said pleasantly, as if she were greeting old friends rather than the most powerful beings in known space. I hope you'll forgive the informal setting. We're not really set up for diplomatic receptions out here. I am Counselor Prime Vexhai of the Galactic Council, the ancient keeper intoned. We understand you have grievances regarding our policies toward developing civilizations. Captain Chen's smile flickered. Grievances. That's an interesting word choice. I suppose you could call genocide a grievance if you really wanted to minimize it. The synthesist collective buzzed with confusion. Genocide? Council policy specifically prohibits back down a Varian confederacy, Captain Chen interrupted. When they refuse to accept Council guidance? The cultural cleansing of the Theta Orionis colonies? The forced relocation of the Centauri tribes after they developed dangerous nanotechnology? Her voice remained conversational, but something in her eyes made Admiral Zixthara's hands shake. We've been watching, remember? We know what you do to species that don't comply with your vision of galactic order. Counselor Prime Vex's expression remained impassive. Those were necessary actions to prevent technological disasters and cultural contamination. Young species require guidance. Young species require freedom, Captain Chen said flatly. The freedom to succeed, the freedom to fail, the freedom to choose their own path without interference from self-appointed guardians. The crystalline architect chimed with harmonics of confusion. Freedom to fail includes freedom to destroy themselves and others. The Varian Confederacy developed antimatter weapons without proper safety protocols. They could have caused a chain reaction that could have, might have, possibly would have. Captain Chen's voice had turned cold. You destroyed an entire civilization based on hypothetical threats. From where I sit, that looks like the actions of tyrants, not guardians. The digital ascendancy processed for several seconds. Human analysis is flawed. Council actions prevent greater casualties through selective intervention. Selective intervention. Captain Chen repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them. Is that what you call it when you bombard civilian populations who refuse to surrender their technology? Admiral Zixthara felt a chill run down her spine. The human was systematically dismantling the philosophical foundation of council policy with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of an executioner.
What would you have us do? Counselor Prime Vexai asked.
Allow chaos? Permit young species to develop weapons of mass destruction without oversight? Watch civilizations destroy themselves through technological recklessness? Captain Chen leaned forward in her chair. I would have you leave them alone. Let species succeed or fail on their own merits. Offer assistance to those who ask for it. Respect the sovereignty of those who don't. Impossible, the Synthesis Collective buzzed. The risks are too great. One species developing dangerous technology could threaten entire sectors. Like humans did? Captain Chen asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a dropped bomb. The counselors exchanged glances, suddenly aware that they were speaking to representatives of exactly the kind of threat they had spent millennia trying to prevent. You prove our point, the energy being pulsed. You developed dangerous technology. You built a military fleet in secret. You represent exactly the kind of threat council policies are designed to prevent. Captain Chen's smile returned, but now it was the expression of a predator who had just been offered exactly the opening she'd been waiting for. Do we? She asked softly. Have we attacked anyone? Have we conquered any worlds? Have we enslaved any species? She paused. Or have we simply demonstrated that your assumptions about primitive civilizations are fundamentally flawed? You threaten us now, the digital ascendancy pointed out. We defend ourselves now, Captain Chen corrected. Against an empire that has a history of destroying civilizations that don't meet their standards, against a council that speaks of protection while practicing conquest. She gestured around her primitive bridge. You see this ship and think we're dangerous because we built it in secret, but the real danger isn't what we've built, it's what we represent. Proof that your system is based on false assumptions. Proof that intelligent species can develop differently than you expect. Proof that diversity of thought and approach makes civilization stronger, not weaker. Counselor Prime Vexai was silent for several long moments. What do you propose? Captain Chen's expression became businesslike. Dissolution of the current council system. Recognition of species sovereignty. Withdrawal of council forces from occupied territories. Reparations for civilizations that have been destroyed or displaced. Impossible, the architect chimed immediately. The chaos would be unimaginable. The freedom would be unprecedented, Captain Chen replied. But I understand change is difficult for immortal beings. So let me offer an alternative. The bridge fell silent as every eye focused on the human captain. Trial by combat. Admiral Zixthara felt her blood freeze. She looked around the bridge of her flagship, suddenly aware of how small and fragile it seemed compared to the primitive vessels surrounding them. I beg your pardon, Counselor Prime Vexai asked. Captain Chen's smile widened. Single ship engagement. One of your best vessels against one of ours. Winner takes all. You win, humanity submits to council authority. We win, the council agrees to restructure according to our proposals. The Synthesis Collective buzzed with what might have been amusement. You would risk your entire civilization on a single engagement? We would demonstrate the fundamental principle of human philosophy, Captain Chen replied. That freedom is worth any risk, that the right to choose your own path is more valuable than safety. She leaned back in her chair, her expression becoming thoughtful. Besides, it's not really much of a risk. You see, there's something about humans that you haven't figured out yet, something that makes all your calculations and probability assessments meaningless. Which is? Counselor Prime Vexai asked. Captain Chen's smile became truly terrifying. We don't know how to quit. The Galactic Council had not faced a formal challenge to single combat in over 4,000 years. The last species bold enough to make such a demand had been the Korathian Empire, whose battle fleets had once ruled a third of the galaxy before being systematically dismantled by Council forces. The memory of their defeat served as a reminder to younger civilizations about the futility of challenging established galactic order. But the humans were not the Korathians, and as Admiral Zixthara watched the preparations for the trial by combat, she began to understand just how different they really were. The Council had selected their champion carefully. The CSS Inevitability was a keeper-built dreadnought, 5 kilometers of crystalline perfection that had been forged from the heart of a dying star. Its weapons could crack planets, its shields could withstand supernovas. It was, by any measurable standard, the most powerful single vessel ever constructed. The humans had chosen something called the HSV Underdog. Admiral Lieutenant Kethmos reported, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy, the human vessel is unusual. Admiral Zixthera studied the tactical display with growing bewilderment. The HSV Underdog was roughly half the size of a standard Council destroyer, constructed from what appeared to be salvaged materials welded together with minimal attention to aesthetic appeal. Its hull was a patchwork of different metals, its engine seemed to be held together with external strapping, and its weapons were crude kinetic accelerators that belonged in a museum.
It looks like a junk heap, she muttered.
Yes, ma'am, Lieutenant Kethmos agreed, but the energy readings are inconsistent with its appearance. The power core is generating far more energy than its design should allow, and the structural integrity readings don't match the visual assessment. Admiral Zixthara frowned. Explain. According to our scans, the vessel should have torn itself apart the moment it attempted faster-than-light travel. The stress points are all wrong, the material composition is inadequate, and the power distribution system violates basic engineering principles. He paused. Yet here it is, apparently functional and preparing for combat against the most advanced warship in the galaxy. The Admiral studied the display more carefully. Perhaps they're simply unaware of the impossibility of what they're attempting. Or perhaps, came a voice from behind her, they've figured out something we haven't. Admiral Zixthera turned to find Captain Chen standing in her bridge doorway, apparently having beamed aboard without triggering a single security system. The human was dressed in what appeared to be a simple jumpsuit, carrying nothing more threatening than a data pad, yet every instinct the Admiral possessed screamed danger. How did you get aboard? Walk through the front door. Captain Chen gestured casually toward the bridge entrance. Your security systems are really impressive, by the way. Biological scanners, energy detectors, motion sensors, the works. Very thorough, 'cause I'm not carrying any energy weapons, I'm not broadcasting any threatening biological markers, and I'm moving at normal walking speed. Captain Chen's smile was genuinely amused. Sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective. Admiral Zixthara felt her crest feathers rising in alarm. You're suggesting you simply walked through our security? I'm demonstrating a fundamental principle of human engineering. Captain Chen replied. Most sophisticated systems have simple vulnerabilities. Your security is designed to detect threats that match known threat profiles. But what happens when the threat doesn't match any profile in your database? The Admiral stared at the human, suddenly aware that she was dealing with a form of intelligence that operated according to completely different principles than anything in her experience. What do you want? She asked finally. Captain Chen glanced around the bridge, taking in the sleek control surfaces and holographic displays with apparent interest. I wanted to see how you do things. Learn a little about your tactical philosophy. Maybe offer some friendly advice before the engagement begins. Advice? The CSS Inevitability is an impressive ship, Captain Chen said conversationally. Keeper technology, if I'm not mistaken. Crystalline hull construction, quantum entanglement communication systems, probability cascade weapons that can alter local reality to ensure target destruction. Admiral Zixthera blinked. How do you know about probability cascade technology? That's classified beyond the reach of primitive civilizations. Captain Chen's smile turned predatory. Yeah, we get that a lot. Thing is, humans have this habit of figuring out things we're not supposed to know. Comes from being naturally curious and fundamentally stubborn. She moved to one of the tactical displays, studying the readouts with apparent expertise. Your ship's primary advantage is technological superiority. Better weapons, better shields, better everything. Classic overwhelming force doctrine. Very effective against conventional opponents. And against unconventional ones? Captain Chen looked up from the display, her expression thoughtful. That depends. Tell me, Admiral, what do you know about human military history? Very little, the Admiral admitted. We have this concept called asymmetric warfare, the idea that a weaker force can defeat a stronger one by refusing to fight on terms that favor the stronger opponent. Captain Chen began walking around the bridge, examining equipment with casual interest. For example, we once had a war where a technologically superior empire was defeated by farmers hiding in jungles using weapons that were obsolete by centuries. Admiral Zixthara felt a chill run down her spine. You're suggesting the HSV underdog will use similar tactics? I'm suggesting that the HSV underdog represents a completely different approach to warfare. Captain Chen paused next to the main tactical console. Your ship is designed to win through superior firepower and defense. Our ship is designed to win by being unpredictable. Unpredictable how? Captain Chen's smile became genuinely terrifying. Well, for starters, everything you think you know about its capabilities is wrong. Before Admiral Zixthara could respond, alerts began sounding throughout the bridge. Lieutenant Kethmos looked up from his console with an expression of complete confusion. Admiral, the human vessel is... On the main display, the HSV underdog was indeed changing. The patchwork hull was shifting, sections sliding apart to reveal internal structures that bore no resemblance to the crude construction they had observed. Weapon ports were opening in configurations that violated basic physics, and the entire vessel seemed to be unfolding like some impossible origami sculpture. "What is it doing?" the Admiral whispered. "Showing you what human engineering actually looks like when we're not pretending to be primitive," Captain Chen replied cheerfully. "See, the thing about being underestimated is that it gives you a tremendous tactical advantage. While your opponents are preparing to fight the enemy they think they see, you're already deploying the capabilities they don't know you have. The transformation was complete." The HSV underdog now bore no resemblance to the salvaged junk heap they had originally observed. It was a sleek, angular predator bristling with weapons that seemed to bend space around them. Its energy signature had increased by several orders of magnitude, and its configuration suggested technologies that Admiral Zixthara couldn't even begin to categorize. "Holographic camouflage?" she asked weakly. "Modular construction," Captain Chen corrected. "Every piece of junk you saw was real. But what you didn't see was how those pieces fit together when properly assembled. It's amazing what you can hide in plain sight when people see what they expect to see instead of what's actually there." The communication system crackled to life. HSV underdog to CSS inevitability. "Ready when you are, big guy." The voice belonged to someone other than Captain Chen, someone whose casual confidence made Admiral Zixthara's blood run cold. This wasn't the bravado of someone facing impossible odds. This was the easy assurance of a predator who had already decided how the fight was going to end. "Admiral," Lieutenant Kethmos reported, his voice tight with stress, "the CSS inevitability is moving to engagement position. On the tactical display, the massive Keeper dreadnought advanced with stately majesty, its crystalline hull gleaming with internal energies that could reshape matter at the quantum level. It was beautiful, terrible, and absolutely unstoppable by any conventional measure. The HSV underdog simply vanished. "Where did it go?" Admiral Zixthara demanded. "Unknown," Lieutenant Kethmos replied, frantically working his controls. "All sensors show empty space. No energy signature, no mass displacement, no gravitational shadow. It's as if the vessel simply ceased to exist." Captain Chen watched the display with professional interest. "Phase shifting. Not true invisibility, just a slight displacement into orthogonal dimensions. The ship is still there, just not in the same spatial framework as your sensors." "That's impossible," the Admiral protested. "Phase technology requires exotic matter manipulation beyond any known science," Captain Chen finished. "Yeah, we hear that a lot. The thing is, human science doesn't always follow the same rules as everyone else's. We have this tendency to look at impossible things and ask, but what if we tried anyway?" The CSS inevitability had stopped its advance, its sensors sweeping space in search of its opponent. Probability cascade weapons charged and discharged, attempting to collapse quantum possibilities that might reveal the hidden enemy. Reality itself bent and twisted as the Keeper technology sought to impose order on chaos. The first impact came from directly behind the dreadnought. Admiral Zixthara watched in disbelief as the massive vessel shuddered under kinetic bombardment that seemed to originate from empty space. The crystalline hull absorbed the damage with minimal effect, but the psychological impact was enormous. The most advanced warship in the galaxy was being shot by an enemy it couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't target. "How?" she whispered. "Orthogonal gunnery," Captain Chen explained casually. "This? Fire projectiles from phase space into normal space. From the target's perspective, the shots literally appear from nowhere. Can't be intercepted, can't be tracked back to the source, can't be defended against using conventional methods." The bombardment intensified. Thousands of projectiles materialized around the CSS Inevitability, overwhelming its defensive systems through sheer volume rather than individual power. The crystalline hull began to show stress fractures as depleted uranium slugs traveling at significant fractions of light speed pounded the vessel from every conceivable angle. "This isn't warfare," Admiral Zixthara said, her voice hollow with shock. "This is execution. This is what happens when humans get 3 years to study your technology and figure out how to counter it," Captain Chen replied. "Every strength becomes a weakness when you understand the underlying principles. Your ship is incredibly tough, but toughness doesn't help when the enemy can attack from dimensions you can't reach." The CSS Inevitability tried to fight back, its exotic weapons lashing out at empty space in hopes of hitting something, anything. Reality warped and twisted as probability cascades attempted to force the hidden enemy into existence through quantum manipulation. The HSV Underdog rematerialized directly above the Dreadnought's primary sensor array. It was no longer the sleek predator they had observed earlier. Now it looked like a mechanical nightmare, all angles and edges and weapons that hurt to look at directly. As Admiral Zixthara watched the human vessel began to unfold again, revealing internal structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than standard physics allowed. "What is it doing?" she asked. "Demonstrating the final principle of human warfare," Captain Chen replied quietly. "When in doubt, get creative." The HSV Underdog attached itself to the CSS Inevitability like a parasitic organism, its hull flowing around the crystalline structure of the larger vessel. Cutting beams began carving through supposedly impenetrable armor while boarding pods launched themselves toward critical systems. "It's not trying to destroy the ship," Admiral Zixthara realized with growing horror. "It's trying to capture it. Waste not, want not," Captain Chen said cheerfully. "That's a 5-kilometer dreadnought built from the heart of a star. Do you have any idea how useful that could be to a species that builds ships from mining equipment and spare parts?" The engagement was over in less than 10 minutes. The CSS Inevitability, the most powerful warship ever constructed, had been disabled, boarded, and captured by a vessel that had pretended to be a junk heap. Its crew was taken prisoner, its technology was being systematically analyzed, and its tactical databases were being downloaded by humans who treated impossibility as a minor inconvenience. Admiral Zixthara stared at the tactical display in stunned silence. Everything she thought she knew about warfare, technology, and galactic power structures had been turned upside down by a species that built ships from garbage and won battles by refusing to follow the rules. "How?" she whispered. Captain Chen's smile was answer enough. "Because we're human. And humans don't know how to quit." The communication system crackled to life one final time. "HSV Underdog to all Council vessels. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. Your empire is over." And as Admiral Zixthara watched her flagship surrounded by impossible human vessels, she realized that the galaxy had indeed not been ready for humanity. It might never be ready for what came next. The Galactic Council's emergency session convened in a chamber that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth of new technologies that reshaped reality itself, and the careful orchestration of galactic civilization for over 10,000 years. Today, for the first time in recorded history, it was convening in defeat. Counselor Prime Vex High stood before the assembled representatives of 14 million species, her ancient form bearing the weight of absolute failure. Behind her, holographic displays showed the tactical situation across Council space. Human fleets emerging from hyperspace at strategic locations, Council forces surrendering without firing a shot, and the systematic dismantling of military installations that had been considered impregnable. "Fellow Councilors," she began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber, "we face an unprecedented situation. The human species has not merely defeated our champion vessel, they have demonstrated the fundamental obsolescence of our entire military doctrine." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from thousands of species voiced their outrage, their fear, and their complete inability to comprehend what was happening. The crystalline architects chimed in harmonics of disbelief, while the energy beings of the Nexus Collective pulsed with patterns of confusion. The machine intelligences of the digital ascendancy processed the data streams from the front lines with increasing alarm. "How is this possible?" demanded Ambassador Krothic of the Vrexian hegemony, his multiple arms gesturing wildly. "The humans were pre-warped less than a century ago. They should be requesting membership, not conquering Council space." "They are not conquering," corrected the synthesized voice of the collective mind, speaking through its biomechanical drones. "Analysis of human fleet movement shows strategic restraint. They are accepting surrenders, providing medical aid to wounded Council personnel, and establishing temporary governance structures that maintain existing civilian populations." "Then, what are they doing?" asked the plant-like representative of the Thorian Cooperative. Counselor Prime Vexhi activated the central display showing real-time feeds from across the galaxy. "They are liberating." The word hung in the air like a toxic chemical. Liberation implied that the species being freed had been enslaved in the first place, a concept that challenged the fundamental narrative of Council benevolence that had justified 10 millennia of galactic governance. "Impossible," stated the machine intelligence designated as Prime Calculator 7. "Council policies prevent cultural contamination and technological disasters. Without oversight, developing species would destroy themselves within generations." "Would they?" The voice came from the chamber's main entrance, where a group of humans had appeared without triggering any of the security systems. The speaker was a woman in her apparent 50s, wearing a simple military uniform that bore no resemblance to any known galactic fashion. Her hair was gray, her face lined with age, and her eyes held the kind of patient intelligence that came from decades of experience with impossible situations. "I am General Sarah Martinez, Commander of Human Liberation Forces," she said, walking down the central aisle with the casual confidence of someone who owned everything she surveyed. "And I'm here to answer your questions." The chamber fell silent. The idea that humans had simply walked into the most secure facility in the galaxy without detection was so fundamentally absurd that nobody seemed capable of formulating a response. "How did you?" began Ambassador Krothic. "Get here? Same way we get everywhere," General Martinez replied cheerfully. "We asked nicely." She gestured toward the massive blast doors that sealed the chamber from the outside. "Amazing how many species are willing to cooperate when you explain that you're not here to conquer them, just to remove the government that's been oppressing them for centuries." Counselor Prime Vexhi found her voice first. "General Martinez, the Council demands to know your intentions regarding civilian populations." "Our intentions?" The human general seemed genuinely puzzled. "To leave them alone, mostly. Maybe offer some technological assistance if they want it. Share some cultural knowledge if they're interested." She paused. "Pretty much the opposite of what you've been doing, actually." The Thorian representative rustled aggressively. "The Council provides protection, guidance, and stability to developing civilizations. Without our oversight—" "Let me tell you what your oversight looks like from the outside," General Martinez interrupted, her tone remaining conversational but somehow becoming more menacing. "Would you like to hear what we found?" Without waiting for an answer, she activated a device on her wrist. Holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber showing detailed records of Council interventions across the centuries. The data was comprehensive, damning, and utterly irrefutable. "The Aldoran Cultural Preservation Project," she began, highlighting one of the displays. Official council records state that the Aldorans were relocated to preserve their unique society from technological contamination. What actually happened was forced labor camps where Aldorans were worked to death mining exotic materials for council technology. The chamber erupted again, but General Martinez's voice cut through the noise like a knife. The Centauri Guidance Initiative. Official records describe educational programs to help primitive humans achieve galactic citizenship. Reality? Systematic brainwashing designed to eliminate human cultural identity and create compliant workers for council industries. More displays activated, showing documentation that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. Prison planets disguised as refugee colonies. Species sterilization programs masked as medical assistance. Genocide covered up as natural disasters. How did you get this information? Counselor Prime Vexhai demanded. General Martinez's smile was answer enough from your own databases. Turns out when you spend 3 years learning how council technology works, accessing classified archives becomes surprisingly easy. Impossible, stated Prime Calculator 7. Council encryption uses quantum entanglement locks that require specific biological markers that can be replicated once you understand the underlying technology. General Martinez finished. Humans are really good at reverse engineering, comes from being naturally curious and professionally paranoid. She moved to the center of the chamber, and Admiral Zixthara noticed with professional unease that every council representative was unconsciously leaning away from the human general. There was something about her presence that triggered deep survival instincts, despite her apparently harmless appearance. Here's what's going to happen, General Martinez said, her tone becoming businesslike. Council military forces will stand down immediately. All species currently under Council protection will be given the choice to remain under your governance or declare independence. Forced labor operations will cease. Cultural preservation programs will be terminated. Reparations will be paid to species that have been harmed by Council policies. And if we refuse? Asked the energy being of the Nexus Collective. General Martinez glanced around the chamber, taking in the assembled representatives of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. Then we'll make you comply. But I'd really prefer to do this peacefully. The threat was delivered with the same casual tone someone might use to discuss the weather, but the implications made Admiral Zixthara's blood run cold. The humans weren't negotiating from a position of weakness, they were offering terms to an enemy they had already defeated. You cannot possibly enforce such demands across the entire galaxy, protested Ambassador Krothek. The logistics alone would require what? General Martinez asked. A fleet larger than anything the galaxy has ever seen? Industrial capacity beyond your comprehension? Technological advantages that make your best equipment look like stone tools. She activated another display, this one showing the human fleet positions across Council space. Admiral Zixthara stared at the tactical readout in growing horror. Thousands of vessels positioned at every major Council installation, every strategic resource point, every critical trade route. The humans hadn't just defeated the Council, they had completely surrounded them. How many ships do you have? Whispered Counselor Prime Vexhai. Enough, General Martinez replied simply. We've been preparing for this moment for 3 years, building, planning, recruiting. Turns out, when you treat species like slaves, they're really interested in joining the people who offer them freedom. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. The humans hadn't conquered Council space alone. They had built a coalition of every species the Council had ever oppressed. The Aldorans are flying human-designed ships, Admiral Zixthara realized with dawning horror. The surviving Centauri, the Theta Orionis refugees. Everyone the Council has displaced or destroyed. Everyone we could find, General Martinez confirmed. Amazing how motivated people become when you offer them a chance for justice instead of charity. She moved to one of the holographic displays showing industrial installations throughout human space. Asteroid mining operations producing raw materials, orbital shipyards working around the clock, research facilities developing new technologies, all of it hidden from your surveillance by the simple expedient of not using energy signatures you were programmed to detect. The scale of it was staggering. The humans had built an industrial empire in secret, using methods that bypassed every council monitoring system. They had turned their technological primitiveness into a strategic advantage, developing parallel technologies that operated according to completely different principles. "What do you want?" Counselor Prime Vex High asked finally. General Martinez turned to face her directly. "What we've always wanted, to be left alone to make our own choices, to succeed or fail on our own terms. To live free from the interference of self-appointed guardians who think they know what's best for everyone else." She paused, her expression becoming thoughtful. "The difference is that now we have the power to ensure that freedom, not just for ourselves but for every species that wants it." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Council had spent millennia building an empire based on the premise that younger species needed guidance from their betters. The humans had just proven that premise catastrophically wrong. "And if species choose to remain under Council governance?" asked the Thorian representative. "Then they remain under Council governance," General Martinez replied. "Choice is the key word, voluntary association versus forced compliance. People who want to be part of your system can stay. People who don't can leave." "You're talking about the dissolution of galactic civilization," Prime Calculator 7 stated flatly. "I'm talking about the beginning of real galactic civilization," General Martinez corrected. "Based on cooperation instead of coercion, on mutual respect instead of enforced compliance. On the radical idea that intelligent species can govern themselves without needing permission from their supposed betters." Admiral Zixthara stared at the human general and realized she was looking at something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that had turned their outsider status into an advantage. They had observed the Council's empire from the outside, identified its fundamental weaknesses, and systematically exploited those weaknesses to bring down a civilization that had endured for 10,000 years. "What happens now?" she asked. General Martinez's smile was genuinely warm. "Now? Now you get to find out what freedom looks like. For the first time in your civilization's history, you get to choose your own path without someone else telling you what's possible." She began walking toward the chamber exit, then paused and looked back at the assembled council representatives. "Fair warning, though," she said casually, "freedom is scary. It means taking responsibility for your own mistakes instead of blaming someone else's guidance. It means accepting that some people will make choices you disagree with. It means living in a universe where there are no guarantees except the ones you make for yourself." Her expression became serious. "But it also means discovering what you're really capable of when nobody's holding you back. And trust me, that's worth any amount of fear." General Martinez left the chamber the same way she had entered it, walking out the front door with casual confidence while the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in stunned silence behind her. The Council had ruled the galaxy for 10 millennia. In 3 years, humanity had made them obsolete. The stars, indeed, had not been ready. 5 years after the liberation, as historians would later call it, Admiral Zixthara stood on the observation deck of the former Council flagship CSS Destiny, now serving as the headquarters of the Galactic Freedom Coalition. The view outside showed something that would have been impossible to imagine during the Council's reign. Dozens of ships from different species working together on a voluntary basis, their crews sharing technology and knowledge without any central authority forcing cooperation. The transformation had been remarkable and terrifying. Within months of the Council's surrender, over 60% of member species had declared independence. Some had chosen to maintain loose affiliations with their former overseers, while others had struck out entirely on their own. A few had joined the growing coalition of worlds that looked to humanity for inspiration rather than leadership. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Eldoran Development Project," announced Commander Veltar, the Vrexian officer who had volunteered to serve as her communications specialist. The idea of voluntary service had taken some getting used to, but Admiral Terra had to admit that crews who chose to be there worked with considerably more enthusiasm than those who had been assigned. "Put it through," she replied, turning from the view screen to the holographic display that materialized at the center of the command bridge. The image showed a bustling construction site in orbit around Eldora Prime, where massive shipyard facilities were taking shape. The design was clearly influenced by human engineering principles, functional rather than beautiful, modular rather than elegant, built to be repaired and upgraded rather than replaced. But the workers were Alderaan, and they moved with the purposeful energy of people building something for themselves rather than for distant masters. "Admiral Terra," the project coordinator said, his translated voice carrying obvious pride, "the first Alderaan-built vessel will be launched next week. We wanted to invite you to the ceremony." Admiral Terra felt a strange mixture of emotions. The Alderaans had been one of the species the Council had relocated for their own good, breaking up their society to prevent what computer models had suggested might be dangerous technological development. Now they were building starships that incorporated both their traditional craftsmanship and human shared engineering principles. "It would be my honor," she replied. "How are the test flights progressing?" The Alderaan's expression became genuinely excited. "Better than expected. The human advisors suggested modifications to our original designs that we never would have considered. Apparently, there are advantages to building things that can be fixed in the field rather than replaced in the factory." After the transmission ended, Admiral Terra returned to her contemplation of the impossible vista outside. The freedom that General Martinez had promised was indeed scary, but it was also exhilarating in ways she was still learning to understand. "Admiral," Commander Veltar approached with a datapad in his hands, the weekly status reports from the Coalition worlds. She accepted the pad and began scrolling through the information. The Centauri colonies had established their own government and were experimenting with democratic processes that would have horrified Council efficiency experts. The Thorian Cooperative had developed new agricultural techniques that dramatically increased food production without requiring the exotic technologies the Council had deemed necessary. The survivors of the Theta Orionis incident had built a memorial fleet dedicated to ensuring that no other species would suffer the kind of protective intervention they had endured. Most remarkably, none of them were destroying themselves. The Council's fundamental assumption that young species required guidance to prevent self-destruction was being proven wrong on a daily basis. Species after species was demonstrating that intelligence and the freedom to apply it were sufficient to build stable, prosperous societies. "Any problems?" she asked. "The usual," Commander Veltar replied with what might have been amusement. "The Korathian fragments are arguing about reunification treaties. The Nexus energy beings are complaining that physical species don't understand their communication protocols. The digital ascendancy is offering to upload everyone's consciousness, and everyone else is politely declining." Admiral Terra smiled. The problems of freedom were so much more manageable than the problems of empire. "And the humans?" "Still refusing to accept leadership positions in the coalition," Commander Veltar reported. General Martinez's response to the latest request for formal authority was, and I quote, "We broke the old system so everyone could build new ones, not so we could become the new overlords." That was perhaps the most remarkable thing about humanity. They had demonstrated the power to conquer the galaxy, then systematically refused to do so. Instead, they offered assistance to anyone who wanted it and left everyone else alone to make their own choices. "Signal from human space," the communications officer announced. "Captain Chen would like to speak with you." Admiral Terra straightened involuntarily. In the 5 years since first contact, she had developed a healthy respect for human military officers that bordered on professional admiration. Their complete unpredictability made them simultaneously the most effective allies and the most terrifying potential enemies she had ever encountered. The holographic display activated, showing the familiar jury-rigged bridge of a human vessel. Captain Chen looked older than she had 5 years ago, but her expression still carried that predatory confidence that made Admiral Terra's survival instincts twitch. "Admiral," Captain Chen said pleasantly. I hope you're enjoying your new assignment. More than I expected, Admiral Zixthera replied honestly. Freedom is challenging. Captain Chen's smile widened. The best things usually are. I'm calling because we've detected something interesting at the edge of galactic space. Long-range sensors are picking up artificial signatures from the direction of the Magellanic Clouds. Admiral Zixthara felt her crest feathers rising. Another spacefaring civilization? Looks like it. Big one, too. Energy signatures suggest industrial capacity on par with what the Council had at its peak.
Captain Chen paused.
They're headed this way. The implications hit Admiral Zixthera like a physical blow. An external threat the size of the old Council, approaching a galaxy that had just finished dismantling its primary military force. The Coalition was still learning how to cooperate. They weren't ready to face conquest by an organized external power. How long until they arrive? She asked. Best estimate? 18 months. Maybe 2 years if they stop to investigate the outer systems before committing to full invasion. And you're telling us because? Captain Chen's expression became serious. Because this galaxy belongs to everyone who lives in it, not to whoever has the biggest fleet. The Council learned that lesson the hard way. Maybe these newcomers can learn it the easy way. Admiral Zixthara studied the human captain's face, recognizing something she had learned to fear and admire in equal measure. That peculiar human combination of reasonable diplomacy backed by absolute ruthlessness. What are you proposing? Unified defense, Captain Chen replied immediately. Every species that wants to remain free contributes what they can to a joint military force. Human tactical doctrine, Aldoran craftsmanship, Thorian biological sciences, Vrexian manufacturing, Keeper exotic technologies. She paused. Even Council administrative experience, if you're interested. The offer was breathtaking in its scope and implications. A truly voluntary military alliance between equals, built on mutual respect rather than enforced compliance. It was everything the Council had claimed to be but had never actually been. And if we succeed in defending the galaxy? Captain Chen shrugged. Then everyone goes home and gets on with their lives. Same as always. And if we fail? The human captain's smile turned predatory. Admiral, in 5 years of working with humanity, have you ever seen us fail at anything we really put our minds to? Admiral Zixthara thought about the impossible fleets that had materialized from empty space, the technologies that violated known physics, the casual dismantling of a 10,000-year-old empire by a species that built ships from mining equipment. No, she said quietly, I haven't. Then let's not start now. Captain Chen leaned forward in her chair. The galaxy learned how to be free. Now let's teach it how to stay that way. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Zixthera alone with her thoughts and the vast display of free ships working together outside her viewport. Somewhere in the direction of the Magellanic Clouds, an unknown civilization was approaching with conquest on its mind. They would find a galaxy that had learned the most dangerous lesson in the universe, that freedom was worth fighting for, and that intelligent species working together could accomplish things that no empire could achieve through force. The stars had not been ready for humanity. The approaching conquerors would not be ready for what humanity had taught the galaxy. Admiral Zixthera activated her communications console and began sending messages to every coalition world, every independent species, every fragment of the old council that had chosen freedom over security. This is Admiral Zixthera of the Galactic Freedom Coalition, she said, her voice carrying to 1,000 different worlds where 1,000 different species were learning what it meant to choose their own destiny. We have a situation that requires the attention of everyone who values their independence. She paused, thinking about Captain Chen's confident smile and General Martinez's casual dismantling of everything the galaxy had thought it knew about power and authority. It's time to show the universe what free people can accomplish when they work together. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species after species volunteered ships, personnel, resources, and knowledge. Not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. The galaxy that had spent millennia under the thumb of benevolent overlords was about to demonstrate what it could accomplish when those overlords got out of the way. And somewhere in human space, in shipyards built from asteroid mining equipment and orbital platforms constructed according to principles that shouldn't have worked but somehow did, the species that had taught the galaxy about freedom was preparing to teach it one more lesson. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Sometimes the most effective strategy is the one nobody expects. And sometimes, when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object, the smart money is on the humans who built the object out of spare parts and powered it with fusion reactors that shouldn't work but do it anyway. The galaxy had learned to be free. Now, it would learn to fight free. The stars indeed were finally ready. Initial contact with Terra. The stars were not ready. HFY Sci-Fi.